I'm Dave Barkemeyer, Milam County Judge. First of all, Happy New Year to all of you. I hope 2013 proves to be a good and prosperous year for all of us here in Milam County. I want to take a few minutes today to present to you what I've called the State of the County Report, which includes a look back at some of the highlights of 2012 and a discussion of some of the challenges facing us in 2013. First of all, let's look at how we did versus our budget in 2012, starting with the general fund. There's some 36 different functions or departments that have accounts in the general fund, and overall this group came in about $500,000 or 5.4% under budget. This is outstanding. I couldn't ask for any better cooperation. The general fund budget for 2012 was set back in September of 2011 at $10.3 million, and it included $300,000 in reserves. We always build our reserves into the budget even if we don't intend to use them. Also, the Texas Local Government Code requires that we set our budget several months in advance. So to some extent we have to guesstimate how much reserves we'll have that are built up to start the new year. So you'll see that as our budgeted reserves don't always match the actual amounts that we have in the bank. Well, for 2012, our revenues from all sources totaled $9.9 million, and we actually spent only $9,740,000. So we spent about $160,000 less than we took in. So we started the year with about $400,000 in reserves in the general fund. So adding the $160,000 to that, we'll start the new year with $560,000 in reserves. Not as much as I'd hoped for. I actually put $1 million into the 2013 budget, but nevertheless, another step in the right direction in continuing to build up our reserves. There's something of significance here that I want to point out before we move on. It has to do with the major role that county government plays in law enforcement. I added up the expenditures of those general fund departments that are in one way or another involved in law enforcement. 20 of the 36 general fund departments are involved and spent over $6 million last year. I included only half of my county judge account and half of the county clerk's account, since we do other things as well. But you can see that all the other groups on the list, they are 100% involved in law enforcement. And the conclusion to all of this is that law enforcement is by far our #1 expenditure. The next major budget category is our 4 road and bridge accounts, our precinct accounts as we call them. Our 4 road and bridge account budgets combined for 2012 totaled $6,345,000, and that included $1,850,000 in reserves, or just under $5 million without the reserves. Now we collected only $4,379,000 in total revenue this past year, and having an aggressive road improvement program like we did, we spent $4,734,000, or about $355,000 more than we collected. Therefore, we drew down our road and bridge reserves by that amount to just over $2 million to begin 2013. Now this is still a healthy amount of reserves, but I'm very pleased with the progress that our 4 commissioners made on our road and bridge improvements in 2012. You see here some of the roads that were permanently surfaced during the year. Now this slide here shows a list of all the county roads that were surfaced over the course of 2012. There were over 12 miles of county roads that were paved throughout the county this past year. In addition, a significant amount of right-of-way clearing and widening, including ditch clearing and so on, ditch cleaning, was accomplished during this past year. This particular shot here is a picture of one of the widening projects while it was in progress this past year. So in conclusion, the commissioners stayed in the budget but spent more than we collected by $350,000 or so. But as a result, we made good progress on permanent improvements to our county roads. We still have adequate reserves in our road and bridge accounts, except maybe for Precinct 3. However, we cannot continue to draw these reserves down in the future. At the same time, we believe that we need to continue to make significant progress on our county roads. Therefore, we have a proposal that we're developing for your consideration that will enable us to continue and even maybe speed up this work. I'll be discussing this with you in a few minutes, but first, let me sum up 2012's total expenditures. We spent $9,742,000 in the general fund, $4,734,000 in the road and bridge accounts, and $671,000 on debt service, for a total expenditure of $15,147,000 this past year. Now here's our 2013 budget that was set back in September of 2012 that we'll be operating under in this coming year. $11.2 million general fund, that includes $1 million in reserves. $6.47 million total road and bridge, including $2.2 million in reserves. And $620,000 was set aside for debt service for this next year, a total of $18.3 million. But if you subtract off the $3.2 million in reserves that are built in, we have actually budgeted $15.1 million for 2013 without the reserves. So actually, we're budgeting to spend a few dollars less this next year than what we actually spent in 2012. Let me pause here for a second to talk about the debt service. We refinanced our bonds late last year for a significant savings to the county. You've heard me talk about this before. We have $6.37 million in general obligation bonds that were taken out in 2004 to build our law enforcement center. As you saw, our 2012 debt service payment was $671,000, a little more than that, in September. In September, we budgeted $621,000 as a payment for 2013 in anticipation of doing this refinancing. When we finally got it done in about December, our payment turned out to be only $606,000, even better than what we anticipated. And in 2014 and beyond, our payments will run about $612,000 a year. So our total savings over the next 12 years will be approximately $764,000. So we're real proud of that. In discussing the 2013 budget with you, I'd first like to explain the various sources of funds. Of course, our primary source is ad valorem, or property taxes. We anticipate collecting about $10.5 million with our 60 cent per 100 county property tax rate. Second, we have budgeted to collect $1.4 million in sales tax with our half-cent county sales tax rate. And in addition, we anticipate about $3.2 million in fines and fees. And finally, as I've mentioned, we're budgeting $3.2 million in reserves that we don't intend to spend, but in case we need to, it'll be there. I think it's important that I give you a little more detail here. First of all, let's talk about property taxes. Our Milam County properties were evaluated at $3.3 billion this past year. That includes all land, improvements, personal property, and minerals. Actually, our land values in Milam County went down this past year about $150 million. The only thing that went up overall was minerals, which went up slightly by about $8 million. However, ag exemptions actually went down about $136 million, so our assessed values stayed about the same as the year before, assessed value being market value minus the ag exemptions. But the big hit came on taxable value, which is down by $147 million due to a big drop in environmental exemption, which is the main exemption in the other exemptions you see here, and that mainly was the aluminum Unit 5 exemption granted by the TCEQ for the fluidized beds. This resulted in a drop in our tax levy for 2013 by $859,000, just under $1 million less than the previous year. The 60-cent Milam County tax rate is applied to what's called the freeze-adjusted base, which is the amount remaining after the over 65 exemption is subtracted. So this year we're budgeting for $10.5 million in ad valorem taxes. And what I've just given you is a rundown of how that's calculated. Notice that $3.76 million of that amount, or 36%, is paid by Lumina, our #1 taxpayer in Milam County. So you can see just how important luminant power plants are to Milam County's tax base. This should give you a good overview of the status of the Milam County tax base. We budgeted for $1.4 million in sales tax revenue for 2013. Now we collected a little over $1.2 million in 2012, but we anticipate that being even higher amount in this next year, mostly due to increased oil drilling activity that we anticipate having here in the county. The next thing I'd like to do is to familiarize you with the various sources of fines and fees that we anticipate will be generated, and we expect over $3 million in revenue across the county this next year. The tax office, the first category here we'll look at is the tax office collects over $700,000 each year in auto license fees. And all of this goes to our 4 precincts, along with part of the ad valorem tax as the revenue stream for our road and bridge accounts. They also, the tax department also collects motor vehicle sales tax. We budgeted for $75,000 for this next year, but in 2012 we actually collected over $100,000. But we don't know that we'll be able to get that much again this following year. Colette Morgan and her staff also collect ad valorem taxes for all the cities and schools in the county, and they charge a fee for doing that. And they earn a little over $60,000 a year for us for providing that service. The next highest potential source of revenue for us this next year will now be our new contract to house prisoners for Coryell County. We budgeted for $600,000 in revenue from this source. Let me show you here the results of our first 7 months or so of operation under this 5-year contract. That period running from about middle of May last year through the end of December. We actually grossed $300,000 during that time period. We averaged about 34 inmates at $43 a day. At the peak time in July or so, they were sending us close to 50 inmates. We actually had to send some of them over to Lee County during that overflow period, costing us about $30,000. That activity stopped in August, and we probably won't need to do that again due to the modifications that we're making to the jail. We bought 1 van at a cost of $28,000, and we hired 2 additional jail deputies at a total cost of about $7,600 a month for their salary and benefits. Day-to-day costs run about $3,000 per month. So we netted about $160,000 in 2012 on this deal. And that's writing off the entire cost of that van. And if you look ahead to 2013, we conservatively estimate that we'll get at least $500,000 in revenue, personnel costs for those 2 extra deputies at $50,000 each, and day-to-day cost a total of conservatively $50,000 for next year. We should net at least $350,000 in 2013, and I believe that's a conservative estimate. The next category of fines and fees includes traffic fines, which we budgeted for $450,000 for 2013, including both the DPS and the Sheriff's Department activities. A part of this includes our concerted effort to collect delinquent fines over these past couple of years. Even though we collected $300,000 in 2012, there's still over $2.8 million in delinquent fines outstanding. We now have all these overdue fines in our agency's collection system, and our JP offices are keeping these up to date. So our collection effort will continue at an intense level in 2013. In addition to traffic fine collection, our 4 JP offices also collect over $120,000 in other fines and fees each year, and our constables collect over $50,000 in fees for their services. The next category of fines and fees are those assessed in our district and county courtrooms. Obviously, more fines are collected in county court because in district court, jail or prison time is more often the sentence for felonies, whereas in county court, where misdemeanors are tried, fines are more often appropriate punishment. Now here you can see the level of activity in 2012 in the county courtrooms. I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but let me hit a few highlights. We've done a good job of controlling the number of jury trials this year, and as a result, jury costs for the year were down and only cost us $10,400. Also, in county court, court-appointed attorney costs were well under control, with costs just under $8,000, where in district court these costs were up this year, running over $200,000. And these numbers could run even higher in 2013 with 2 murder trials on the docket. Adult probation fines and fees are relatively low this year compared to past years. It's running at $50,000. However, that department collects an additional $250,000 or so that's retained within the department to support the cost of their departmental operations. The health department, the numbers you see there, also attains a lot of additional grants and monies that do not feed through our county budgeting process, that are used within the operation of the health department. In conclusion, I want to talk about the challenges that are facing Milam County in 2013 and beyond. While we were working on getting our bonds refinanced, we were trying to get the Fitch bond rating service to up the rating of our bonds, which had slipped from AAA to BBB over the last few years. They handed us some pretty severe criticism, which translates into some very ambitious challenges that we're going to have to deal with if we're going to get our bond rating back up, and frankly, if we're just going to get our performance from a business standpoint where it ought to be. First of all, they pointed out that our general fund reserves are way below par, that we need to maintain at least 20% in reserves, which means that we need at least $2 million in reserves. So, as I've shown, we're up to $561,000 to start 2013. So, we've got a long way to go. They said our cash-based accounting methodology is not generally accepted. So, we're going to change back to the accrual accounting methodology during this coming year and get back where we ought to be from an accounting practices standpoint. Now this next one really stings. They said that we need consistent use of sound financial and business management practices by our county elected officials and department heads. They did say that they saw some signs of improvement, but that they weren't convinced that we were there yet. So we got to get with the program here. And this one is the most important of all. We need to diversify Milam County's tax base. In other words, we desperately need some significant successes in the economic development efforts in the county. So there you have it, really. They've laid down the gauntlet for us. The county is getting more involved with Cameron, Rockdale, and Thorndale economic development groups, and we must all continue to work together to bring business and industry and jobs to Milam County. That's all there is to it. We adopted what we call the county tax phase-in program this past year in Commissioner's Court, and the 3 cities are following suit. They had various programs in place already, but we need to have a consistent program amongst us that we can tout to the various companies that might be interested in bringing their business to Milam County. LCRA, Lower Colorado River Authority, is in the midst of their due diligence regarding purchase of the Milam County Alcoa property. We've already had discussions with them regarding their willingness to work with us to bring new industry and jobs to that site, should they go through with that purchase. And we also are looking at the impact that might have on such things as tax revenue, the water supply for future industry in Milam County, and other issues that are critical to us here in the county. The potential for significant increases in oil production looms on the horizon, considering the huge amount of leasing activity that's been going on recently here in the county, and that is a real encouraging sign. And we recently announced that Milam County would be the first county in the state to install signage on the El Camino Real, and our intention is to take advantage of the tourism opportunities that affords for our county. Rockdale, Cameron, and Thorndale Chambers of Commerce are working together to begin an annual El Camino Real Trade Days event later this year that will highlight the trail along with some of our county historical assets. And as I mentioned earlier, we believe that the continuation of efforts to bring about permanent improvements to a significant portion of our county roads is very important to the future development of Milam County. And I'm sure that the people that live out in the rural areas of Milam County will appreciate continuing improvement of our roads as well. The commissioners and I are in the process of developing a proposal for your consideration, which will be basically a 5-year plan for permanent surfacing and other improvements to approximately 100 miles of our county roads. The cost will be about $5 million. In other words, about $1 million additional per year, and we're looking at financing it with 20-year bonds issued over that 5-year period. And we're working out the details as we speak. This absolutely must be done without raising the tax rate. We can't afford a higher tax rate if for no other reason, this would only further discourage economic development in the county. So the commissioners are going to prepare a specific plan for voters to consider in a special bond election. In other words, we're not going to go ahead with something like this without full support from you, the citizens of the community. Well, that's about it. When I ran for office, you might recall that I said that I had 5 objectives in mind if you were to elect me as your county judge. Well, here I am. And here's what those objectives were: to bring jobs and economic growth to Milam County and to promote cooperation among local entities. Next, to improve county roads and infrastructure. Third, to ensure that Milam County is a safe place to live and to promote cooperation among our law enforcement agencies. Fourth, to develop our historical assets. And finally, to promote productive relationships with our elected officials and our neighboring counties. And I can assure you I remain committed to those objectives. Thank you for listening to me today.